Hey, what's up, everyone? How are you? This is Movie Manny back for another episode of the Movie Manny podcast. So, I'm here today and I'm talking about a trailer for a film that I just saw that's coming out Christmas time 2024, and that film is called A Complete Unknown. It is a biopic, a musical biopic about Bob Dylan. Now, Bob Dylan, a lot of people are asking, like, who is Bob Dylan? Who is this guy? I've heard the name. I know he has some kind of significance. He sang some songs in the 60s that kind of resonated with people, but who is this person and why is he important? Well, to me, this is a film I've been waiting for a long time. This is definitely a film I've been waiting for a long time because I've always been a huge fan of Bob Dylan probably since I was in high school. I think it was ninth grade. I vividly remember taking a trip with my class in ninth grade. We took a trip to England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France. And I remember, being in a bus and traveling through Paris and just seeing all the sights and everything like that. And I didn't know anything about Bob Dylan. The only reference point I had to Bob Dylan at that point was that my dad was a huge fan of Bob Dylan. My mom used to talk about it all the time. I used to see his Bob Dylan records in the house and some of his CDs and stuff. And I was like, my dad wasn't into too many musicians, so it kind of caught my eye that I would see this Bob Dylan character everywhere. But I never really listened to his music. But for this trip, I needed some CDs to take with me because I knew there'd be a lot of time on, traveling. I might have some board time. And in that time, I had like a little CD player. So basically, I put the CD inside of a CD player, and then I had my little headphones. And man, that shit would skip all the time and everything. But still, it was great to have on trips. So I think it was Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits. My dad had like a double CD, Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits, Part 1, Part 2. And I took it with me, not even thinking. I took a bunch of other CDs with me too, but that was just one of them. But I remember this moment. We were driving, I believe it was France, but it was kind of more in the hillside, the countryside, because we were in a bus, and I remember just looking out the window, seeing all the beautiful sights, and then I put the Bob Dylan CD in. I put it in, and I put it on my ears, and oh my God, I don't know how to explain that feeling. And I think it was just the right timing of everything, of having the soundtrack and having all the visuals of all this new terrain that I've never experienced before for the first time as a kid, seeing a beautiful new country with so much history. And then also having behind that this Bob Dylan soundtrack that went along with it. And that pretty much changed my perspective on Bob Dylan forever because he gave me that moment. That was such a perfect moment for me because it really just made France seem so damn mystical, because the songs that were playing were the first times I've heard these Dylan songs. So I didn't know any context, or I didn't know when he made them and, or why he made them. But it seemed like he was talking about whatever I was seeing. No matter what he was singing about, I was looking out at the green grass, at the buildings, all the architecture, the people, stuff I've never seen before that looks so kind of foreign to me. But Dylan singing was making it make sense. And he felt like he was singing about what I was looking at, even though I know he couldn't have done that because he made these songs decades before I even took this trip. So it was kind of, to me, when I first heard him, it definitely felt different than music because I haven't had that experience many other times where it felt like, wow, there's some sort of sorcery going on here. There's some sort of magic. Something's a little different. This guy is speaking to me through music, but the words he's using is making it seem so relevant to now, even though it was made years ago, before I was even born. So that was my initial connection to Bob Dylan, just listening to him while I was traveling through France, and it was such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And so I started, from then on, when I got home, I just started going on that deep dive into basically all of his records, his history, just all of the stories, the bootlegs, the concerts, just the myth around Bob Dylan. And there is so much to chew on. I mean, if you ever just get lost in something, just get lost in his story. You'll be, it's a never-ending journey. I've been since ninth grade just, obsessed with this. And there's always more. There's always something you haven't heard, something you haven't figured out. This man has lived an incredible, artistic, creative, musical life. And it's a lesson for all of us. That's why I really love Bob Dylan more than anything else, is his life is a lesson. You have to really see that. You have to really understand how this person has been able to do this for this long, continue to reinvent himself constantly, and bringing the audience along with him. That's such a special thing because many people along the line, if they try to make a big change, if an artist tries to make a big change, they lose their audience. They lose their audience. People are like, I don't want to see you as that. I like this thing you did. I want more of that. I don't want to see this other thing. I don't want to see you experiment and try to do something new. Audiences always leave. So why for so long have audiences stuck with Bob Dylan through his multiple reinventions of himself? It's something to look at, something to study, and something to learn from so you can apply it to your own life. Because I think a lot of people, especially if they're in creative fields, they get stuck. They get their tires in the mud. It starts spinning. It's like, why am I stuck in the same place? Why am I doing the same thing now that I was doing years ago? And it's because I believe they haven't watched or listened or studied enough of Bob Dylan. Because if they had, I think it could give them some keys of how to maybe break out of this creative monotony they might be in, or break out of this stalemate or this dry spell. There's so many hints and lessons throughout Bob Dylan's career that you could pick from and take from and you apply it to your own life. I'm telling you. Not only is his music fantastic and timeless and classic, it's his life. That's the most important thing. And that's why I'm so excited about this upcoming biopic, A Complete Unknown, directed by James Mangold, starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. And James Mangold has done other musical biopics, like for Johnny Cash, he did Walk the Line, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon. I think that was a huge success, and it spawns, comedies like Walk Hard that parodied it. That's how you know it was a huge success, when you get parodies of your stuff. So getting back to A Complete Unknown, I saw a trailer for it a few weeks ago, and I was blown away. And I was absolutely blown away. Because I was like, oh my God, this is not only a film that's needed, it's a Bob Dylan film that's needed. For the fans that really love him, that have been craving some sort of biopic about his life, I feel this seems a little bit more straightforward and can really tell that story with an impact. Because we had, don't get me wrong, in like the late 2000s, we had Todd Haynes created a biopic for Dylan called I'm Not There. But this was, as much as I love that film, and Cate Blanchett's playing Bob Dylan during the 60s, it was a very complicated film. It's really only for Bob Dylan diehards, because I think 8 different people play him in that movie, all different parts of his life, all different sections of his life. Like I said, this guy has reinvented himself so many times. So what Todd Haynes did in his previous movie about Bob Dylan called I'm Not There, he tried to break up the different eras of Bob Dylan's life into different characters and had different people play him. Like Heath Ledger played him, Christian Bale, like I said, Cate Blanchett, Richard Gere. All these people kind of played Bob Dylan at different eras. But that film, I think if you're not a huge Dylan fan or aficionado, it confuses the hell out of you. There's different moments about it that I think people have found really cool, but I don't think that movie connected well with audiences that weren't already super deep into Dylan. Whereas I feel this new film, A Complete Unknown, I feel like this has the potential to reach even people that are not deep into Dylan, that could bring new people in and be like, oh my God, I understand why this person's life is so important. I understand why this person's life deserves a movie. Not everybody's life deserves a movie, but Dylan's life especially is such an incredible artistic journey and such a defiant journey, and that's why I fucking love Dylan. And the movie's coming out in December, right? December 2024, around Christmas time. So from now until then, believe me, this is not the last video that I'm going to make about this subject. I want to talk about this film because I want this film to do really well, and I want this film to be good. I really want this film to be good because it deals with a very important era in Dylan's life, which is kind of his beginning stages, where he kind of, moved away from his home in Minnesota. He moved away all the way to this big city, New York. He came with his guitar and some skills, and he basically started from nothing. He started with no family, friends, connections, and he built himself there. He built himself because he created a new character for himself. People would ask him where he's from, this and that. He'd make up all different stories. He'd start creating his own myth, because when you're a stranger in a strange land, you have the ability to do that. And right from the beginning, Dylan teaches us leaving your hometown is important. Leaving everyone who loves you and cares for you, who protects you, to search for something new is important. It's important. In every journey, It doesn't always have to begin there, but I think somewhere along the line, you have to venture out into unknown territory and see what the fuck happens. There could be no family around. There could be no friends. It's just you and your skills. What can you do? And that's what Bob Dylan does in his early stages. He moves to New York because he sees, there's a folk scene coming up there. Greenwich Village. There's cafes. There's poetry. There's people singing. And they would have all these cafes there where people would pass around their hat and people would, donate money, and that's how artists would get paid. And it was a thriving live music and art and poetry and coffee house scene going on there. And Bob Dylan, who originally is Robert Zimmerman, he changed his name. He's now Bob Dylan. And he's kind of has this persona that he's putting on, like a Woody Guthrie type character, because that was somebody who he idolized. So he's like, you know what? When I come to this new place, this is the persona that I'm going to have, and I'm going to see what births out of this. And it was very exciting times where he would basically sing songs for people. He would start writing his songs, first covering great songs, but then he would have the ability, he would have the courage to start writing his own stuff. And that's what really started clicking with people. He would go to the cafes and people would be like, wow, this is a strange character. This is a cool character. But eventually when he started writing his own material and singing these long poetic ballads that also dealt with things that were happening at the time, like civil rights, and these were really powerful songs like Blowing in the Wind. Imagine hearing Blowing in the Wind for the first time during the civil rights era. Oh my God. What else can you compare? So as he gets to Greenwich Village and does all these cafes and starts gaining, a little bit of a following, and all these songs start coming out and they start making an impact, people start loving him. People, especially from that folk scene, especially from that, Greenwich Village, New York kind of left-wing scene, they love him. They love him. They put him on a pedestal. They basically rise him up to the thing. You're a voice of a generation. You're all of this. You are a leader. You're not just a musician. You're a leader of this generation that's so progressive and pushing forward, and in a matter of years, from him moving from Minnesota to New York, reinventing himself, I'm talking 1 or 2 years, he's at the top of the game. Just by being himself, just based on his pure raw talent alone and his songwriting. Nobody was doing it like him. So he reached this high pedestal, and it kind of culminates with 1965, 1965, he's in the Newport Folk Festival. He headlines a Newport Folk Festival. And this is a huge festival for, all folk acts. Pete Seeger's there. A lot of people from that time performed there. And Bob Dylan was a special guest. He was like, oh my God, this guy, he is our prince, about to be king. They're basically putting the crown on his head and saying, we want you to be our next king. And this is super important. This is super, super important. This is why this movie is being made. I'm telling you, this is why this movie is being made. What Bob Dylan did at this time, when the folk scene was about to anoint him king, was about to say, hey, lead us. You're our leader. You're the best. They bring you to this folk festival. They show you to everyone. They're saying, like, you are the lead. You are basically a god. They're making him into a god. And what Dylan does at this folk festival is he defies them. He defies them. He challenges them. As soon as they start giving him undying love, he realizes that is the time to leave again. And that's why this is so important. That's why I'm telling you, that's why this movie's being made. People need to see this lesson that's being learned here. People need to see this parable and to learn and maybe apply it to their own life because it's important. It's important, especially, like I said, if you're an artist, if you're a creative, anything like that. But then around this same time, something called the electric guitar came out, right? The electric guitar, it was kind of new. It was electric. It was almost like AI is now. It's like, what's that electric shit? That's not real. That's not man-made. That's not, that's got some fucking voodoo in it. I don't want any of that electric guitar. Like I said, it's how people kind of think of AI now. They're like, oh, they're afraid of it. They're afraid of it. And people in the folk scene back then, in the mid-60s, the mid-1960s, they were afraid of electric guitar and all of that kind of what would it bring with it. They were not for that. They were like, how is this going to change the world? How is this going to bring peace? How is this electric guitar? This electric guitar is going to bring chaos. We don't want that. We don't want chaos. We want peace. We want nice. We want, this is going to be a better world for us all. Peace and kumbaya. That's what they wanted. But that's not what Dylan gave them. That's not what Dylan gave them. Right after he was done with his little folk set, he brought his band out to the stage, and then he pumped up his electric guitar, and then he started playing his new songs. And it pissed off the crowd. It pissed off the organizers. They had hands over their ears. They're like, this is not good music. This is kind of mechanical. This is electric. This is noise. This is not music. This is not protest music. This is chaotic, and we don't want it. There's even stories about one of the organizers trying to shut off the speakers, trying to get him off stage, trying to just be like, hey, what are you doing? We're about to anoint you king, and you are defying us. Why are you doing this to us? We love you. We love you. We built you. We made you. Why are you punishing us in that way? And Dylan, he's never really answered this. He's never really gave any explanations, but he had to. He had to. He could not become king of anything, because once he became king, he knew it was inevitable that it was going to crumble. It was going to be over. He didn't want to be king of anything. He wanted to always be in that constant state of having to start over. Moving from Minnesota to New York. Remember that phase? Starting from nothing and building, right? Well, what happens when you get to the top of something? Do you just stay at the top there? Because how do you be creative at the top? How do you build? How do you construct? How do you blow up yourself and recreate something new when you're somebody's God? You can't. That would have been creative death for him. And he intuitively understood that, and he knew that was the perfect time to start over again, to blow everything up. The people that love you, the people that just basically you have to challenge them. You have to defy them in some way. Defy them to love you. And if they don't love you, bye. If they do love you, great. But if they don't love you, you have to be able to say bye and move on. And that's exactly what Dylan did. That night, he probably lost half his audience. People were split down the middle. Some people love the electric guitar. They're like, oh my God, this is futuristic. I can't wait to see what he does next. I can't wait to see where this leads us, because this seems new. So people were hyped, but then the other half of the people were like, no, this is devil's music. This is taking us down a path of destruction. This is taking us down division. This is not bringing people together. This is making people feel uncomfortable. People didn't like that. But what Dylan did with half his audience is he said bye. That very night, he said bye, and he defied them to like him. He's like, I don't need you to like me. I don't need you to like me. I would love for you to like me, but I don't need it. And it was such a moment of defiance that I think everybody can apply to their own life in some way. Maybe we don't have as big a stage of that, but in some way you have to realize that once you are fully embraced, and once you are loved, and once you are put on any sort of pedestal, that is a time, and that is a key indicator that you need to flip it. You need to try something new. You need to take a risk. You need to, in some way, challenge your audience to love you again by doing something new. And Dylan, that wasn't the only time he did that in the mid-1960s at the Newport Folk Festival when he went electric. That wasn't the only time. He did that multiple times throughout his career. But this film, A Complete Unknown, just covers that era, because that was the inciting incident that basically started everything for him, because it was like a pattern that kind of kept repeating itself with Dylan throughout the years. He would build himself up. He would get a love of a new crowd, and then he would defy them, and he would become something else, and they would hate him. Half his audience would hate him, but then he would gain some new people that would really love him and respect him for taking those chances. And then he would then he'd have that crowd. And he'd do something different. And basically every few years, he would constantly break everything apart and reinvent himself. And that, my friends, that is how you have as long of a creative career as Dylan. And that is how at 80-something years old, you could still be playing live shows for the last 20 years nonstop. You never stop being creative, never stop working. You never stop having an audience when you're Bob Dylan. But not everybody's Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan is willing to challenge his audience. Are you willing to challenge your audience? Are you willing to tell everybody that loves you, like, hey, I'm actually going to do something a little different. I'm going to do something over here. Are you going to follow me or are you not going to follow me? You know, with Dylan's audience, Dylan had defied his audience enough times that all of a sudden his audience just started following him no matter what. They would almost expect the defiance. So sometimes him not being defiance would be defiance in itself. He'd always find ways to basically do something new and to try something new. Even in the 80s, he started singing gospel music. Can you believe that? Gospel music. That was the antithesis. His crowd was not into gospel. They were not even into religion at all. And so when he starts bringing all this gospel music into it, believe me, even my dad, who was a huge fan, he got turned off to Dylan. He's like, I stopped listening to him for a few years. But then guess what? He's like, well, then I rediscovered his gospel albums later in life, and you know what? They were actually pretty fucking great. And you know what? They are pretty fucking great. Listen to Bob Dylan's gospel albums. You do not have to be religious at all. I'm not a religious person, but I love those albums. I love waking up to those albums. I love the spirit it fills me with, you know, and I will follow. I am the audience member of Bob Dylan that will follow him wherever he goes. I want to be surprised. I want to see where he goes next. Country, this, that. Just recently, he did covers of Frank Sinatra songs, old classics, old standards, which I didn't think I would enjoy at all. It's not of my era. But I fucking gave it a chance, and I found things in it that I love. It wasn't all for me, but I still listened to it, and I gave Dylan his respect to be like, hey, you're putting this out. I'm going to listen to it. I might not always love it, but I will be there as an audience member, always supporting, always seeing you live, because I respect what you do. I respect how you roll. I respect how you hold yourself. I respect how you constantly reinvent yourself. And that's why I feel like if you don't know Bob Dylan, or if you don't know about him, or the only thing you know about him is, oh, I don't like his voice, maybe this movie will inspire you to dig a little deeper and to listen a little harder and to try a little harder to really understand his story, because it's important. It's important to all of us. Anybody trying to make a career, anybody trying to do anything creative, you have to understand and know this lesson. That as soon as you're put on top, you have to figure out a way to fucking reinvent yourself, challenge the audience, challenge people to love you. And if they don't love you, it's okay. It's okay. Love yourself. Love yourself, believe in yourself, and everything will work out in the end. Just like with Bob. Check out the movie. Until next time, Movie Manny, a complete unknown, out.